Hey everyone, welcome to Red Umbrella. Today I want to argue that The Simpsons is better than Family Guy. Not a little better. Better in every way you can measure a television show. Better characters, better writing, better comedy, better emotion, better satire, better legacy, the whole thing. And look, I like Family Guy. There are Family Guy episodes that made me laugh as hard as anything on television. Seth MacFarlane is genuinely talented, but being funny is not the same as being the best. And when you go through these two shows piece by piece, the gap is so wide it barely counts as a competition. So over the next couple of hours, we are going deep. Characters, comedy, writers' rooms, awards, cultural impact, all of it. And we are starting at the very beginning. Because here is something most people forget. Family Guy did not just come after The Simpsons. Family Guy exists because of The Simpsons. The Simpsons did not just play the game first. It built the entire playground. But before we begin, I'd just like to kindly ask you all to subscribe. It's completely free and it really helps us improve the videos for this wonderful community we've managed to build. Anyway, that's enough. Let's begin. The show that built the playground. Before we even start comparing The Simpsons and Family Guy, we need to talk about something that a lot of people either forget or just never knew in the first place. And it is the simple fact that without The Simpsons, there would be no Family Guy, there would be no South Park, there would be no American Dad, no Rick and Morty, no Beavis and Butthead, none of it. The Simpsons did not just come first. It built the entire stage that every single adult animated show after it has been performing on. And once you really understand that, the conversation between these two shows shifts in a way that most people never think about. Let us go back to the beginning. The Simpson family first showed up on television on April 19th, 1987. Not as a full show, not even as a proper cartoon. They were short little clips, rough drawings that played between commercials on a variety show called The Tracy Ullman Show. Matt Groening, the guy who created the family, had sketched them out in a hurry while sitting in a lobby waiting for a meeting. He named the characters after his own family members. Homer was his dad, Marge was his mom, Lisa and Maggie were his sisters, and Bart was just an anagram for the word brat. The drawings were so rough and messy that when Groening handed them to the animators, they thought those were the final versions and just traced right over them. That is why those early shorts look the way they do. Crude, wobbly, almost like a child drew them, but people loved them. Those little shorts became the most popular part of the entire Tracy Ullman Show. And it did not take long for the network, Fox, to realize they had something special in their hands. On December 17th, 1989, The Simpsons got its own full show. The first episode was a Christmas special called Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire. And right from that very first episode, it was clear this was something different. This was not the Flintstones. This was not the Jetsons. Those older cartoons were fun, sure, but they were made for kids. The Simpsons was something new. It looked like a cartoon, but it talked like a smart comedy for adults. It had jokes that kids would laugh at on the surface, but underneath, there were layers that only the parents in the room would catch. Nobody had really done that before on television. Not like this. Not in animation. Not during prime time, when the biggest shows in the country were airing. And it worked. It worked so well that within its first year, The Simpsons became one of the top 30 highest rated shows on all of American television. In 1990, you could not go anywhere without seeing Bart Simpson on a t-shirt. They were selling 1 million Bart Simpson shirts in a single day. The term Simpson Mania was literally invented to describe what was happening. The show was so big, so fast, that it actually helped put the Fox network on the map. Before The Simpsons, Fox was a small, struggling network that most people did not take seriously. After The Simpsons, Fox was a real player. Experts in the TV industry have gone as far as to say that The Simpsons was the single most important show in turning Fox into a real broadcast network. That is not just being popular, that is changing the entire landscape of television. Now here is where Family Guy enters the picture. Seth MacFarlane, the creator of Family Guy, was a student at the Rhode Island School of Design in the early 1990s. While he was still in school, he made a short animated film for his senior thesis called The Life of Larry. It was about a middle-aged guy and his talking dog. Sound familiar? Because that short film is what eventually became Family Guy. MacFarlane has been open about the fact that The Simpsons was one of his biggest influences. He watched it growing up, he studied it, he learned from it. He saw what Matt Groening and his team had done, and he wanted to do something similar. And he has said as much in interviews. jokes. McFarlane once told Vanity Fair that The Simpsons created an audience for primetime animation that had not been there for many, many years. He called what they did a reinvention of the wheel. He even said you could call it a wholly new medium. That is not some random fan saying that. That is the creator of Family Guy himself, openly admitting that his show exists because The Simpsons proved it was possible. And he is not wrong.
After Fox saw McFarlane's short films, they gave him a tiny budget of $50,000 to make a 15-minute pilot. He pitched it in May of 1998.
The show got picked up, and Family Guy officially premiered on January 31st, 1999. Right after the Super Bowl. That premiere pulled in 22 million viewers. Impressive numbers, no doubt. But think about the timeline here. The Simpsons had already been on the air for a full decade by the time Family Guy showed up. 10 years. That is 10 years of groundwork. 10 years of proving to networks, advertisers, and audiences that animated shows for adults could work in prime time. Family Guy did not have to prove that. That battle was already won. It just had to walk through the door that The Simpsons had kicked open. And this is not just about being first. Plenty of things come first without being important. What makes The Simpsons different is that it did not just show up before everyone else. It changed the rules of what television comedy could be. Before The Simpsons, there was a wall between animation and serious comedy. Cartoons were for Saturday mornings. Cartoons were for kids. If you were an adult watching a cartoon, something was kind of off about you. The Simpsons blew that wall apart. It showed that an animated show could tackle real subjects. Politics, religion, family struggles, working class life, the education system, big corporations, government corruption, all of it. And it could do all of that while still being one of the funniest things on television. That combination, smart and funny at the same time, was almost unheard of in animation before The Simpsons came along. And the ripple effects were massive. After The Simpsons proved that primetime adult animation could pull in huge audiences and win awards, the floodgates opened. Beavis and Butthead came along in 1993, South Park in 1997, Family Guy in 1999, King of the Hill, which was co-created by a former Simpsons writer named Greg Daniels, ran from 1997 to 2010. Futurama, which was created by Matt Groening himself, started in 1999. And in the years after that, you got shows like Bob's Burgers, Archer, Rick and Morty, Big Mouth, and so many others. Every single one of those shows owes something to The Simpsons. Not because they copied it, but because it made the space for them to exist. It proved to the suits at the networks that adults would sit down and watch animation during prime time. Without that proof, none of these shows get made. Now, Family Guy deserves its credit. It found its own voice, it carved out its own style with the cutaway gags and the pop culture references and the shock humor. It has been on the air since 1999, got canceled twice, came back both times, and is still running. That takes something. That is not easy. But the core point remains. When Family Guy was still just a rough drawing in Seth MacFarlane's dorm room, The Simpsons was already on the air, already winning Emmys, already changing television. MacFarlane was in college watching The Simpsons and thinking about how he could do something like that. He has been honest about that. He drew direct inspiration from the show. His original plan for Family Guy was actually to launch it as a series of shorts on the sketch comedy show Mad TV, which is almost exactly how The Simpsons started on the Tracy Ullman show. That plan fell through because of budget issues, and Family Guy ended up going straight to a full series instead. But the blueprint was the same. The model was The Simpsons. And here is where things get interesting from a legacy standpoint. The Simpsons did not just influence other animated shows. It influenced all of television comedy. The self-aware, reference-heavy, layered style of humor that The Simpsons pioneered became the template for a whole generation of comedies, animated and live-action alike. Shows like The Office, Parks and Recreation, The Daily Show, The Colbert Report, and Arrested Development all carry DNA that traces back in some way to what The Simpsons was doing in the early 1990s. The show proved that audiences were smart enough for comedy that worked on multiple levels at once. A joke for the kids on the surface, a joke for the adults underneath, and sometimes a third joke hidden in the background that only the most careful viewers would catch. That style of writing became the gold standard, and it started in Springfield. When you look at awards and recognition, the gap between these two shows in terms of what they have meant to the industry is enormous. The Simpsons was the first animated show to win a Peabody Award. It has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Time magazine named it the best television series of the entire 20th century. Not the best cartoon, not the best animated show, the best television series, period. That is an honor that puts it above every sitcom, every drama, every miniseries, and every special that aired in the 1900s. Family Guy has won awards too, and we will get into those numbers later in this video, but in terms of what the industry itself considers groundbreaking, The Simpsons is in a completely different class. So when we sit here and compare these two shows, we are not comparing equals. We are comparing the original to something that came after it. We are comparing the teacher to the student. We are comparing the show that changed television forever to a show that benefited enormously from those changes. Family Guy is a good show. At its best, it is a very funny show. But The Simpsons did not just make a funny show. It made a new kind of show, and in doing so, it made every animated comedy that followed possible, including Family Guy. That is not a small thing. That is the foundation that everything else was built on. And look, some people might say that being first does not automatically make you better. And that is a fair point. Coming first does not mean much if you do not also do it well. But The Simpsons did not just come first. It came first and set a standard so high that even its own later seasons have struggled to match it. The question now is just how high that standard actually was, and whether Family Guy has ever come close to reaching it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Which brings us to the Golden Age, a stretch of television so good that many critics and fans believe nothing in animation has ever topped it. Section 2, The Golden Age, a peak no animated show has ever matched. Every television show has its best years. There's always a window where everything clicks, where the writing is sharp, the characters feel alive, and every episode seems to land. For most shows, that window might last a season or two before things start to slip. For The Simpsons, that window lasted somewhere around 6 to 8 years. And during that time, the show was not just the best animated comedy on television. It was arguably the best show on television, period. Animated or not. Fans and critics call this stretch the Golden Age. And while people argue about the exact start and end points, the general agreement is that it covers roughly seasons 3 through 8, running from about 1991 to 1997. Some people push it back to include season 2, and some extend it all the way to season 9 or even 10. But the heart of it, the absolute peak, is that seasons 3 through 8 window. During those years, The Simpsons was doing things that no animated show had ever done before, and honestly, no animated show has done since. Not Family Guy, not South Park, not Rick and Morty. Nothing has matched what The Simpsons was putting out during that run. So what made it so special? What was actually different about those seasons compared to everything that came before and after? A few things, and they all worked together at the same time, which is what made the whole thing feel almost magical. First, the writing was operating on a level that is hard to describe unless you actually go back and watch those episodes. Every single scene was packed with jokes. Not just the obvious ones that the characters said out loud. There were jokes in the background of the shot that you would miss unless you paused and looked. There were jokes on signs, on newspapers, on billboards that the camera would pass for half a second. There were references to literature, to history, to politics, to old movies, all woven into the dialogue in a way that never felt forced or like the writers were showing off. A kid watching the show would laugh at Homer falling down a cliff. An adult watching the same scene would catch 3 other jokes buried in the moment that the kid never noticed. And someone with a degree in history might catch a 4th one on top of that. The show was layered in a way that rewarded you for paying attention, and it rewarded you even more every time you rewatched it. Take an episode like Marge versus the Monorail from season 4. On the surface, it is a simple story. A smooth-talking salesman named Lyle Landley comes to Springfield and convinces the town to build a monorail instead of spending their money on something useful. It is a goofy setup. But within that goofy setup, the writers managed to pack in a parody of The Music Man, sharp commentary on how small towns get swindled by fast talkers, one of the catchiest original songs the show ever produced, a guest appearance from Leonard Nimoy, and about 50 individual jokes that are still quoted by fans 30 years later. Almost every single line in that episode has become a reference that people use in conversation. That is the kind of density that the Golden Age operated at. It was not just funny. It was so funny in so many different ways at once that you could watch it 10 times and still find something new. Or look at You Only Move Twice from season 8. Homer gets a new job, working for a company run by a man named Hank Scorpio. Scorpio is friendly, supportive, encouraging, and genuinely seems to care about Homer. He is also, without Homer ever realizing it, a James Bond-style villain trying to take over the world. The entire episode runs on that one brilliant idea, and it milks it for everything it is worth. Homer is happy for the first time in his career. His boss respects him. He is doing well. But the rest of his family is miserable in their new town, and Homer has to choose between his own happiness and theirs. So underneath all the laughs, there is a real emotional choice happening. That is what the Golden Age did better than anyone. It made you laugh hard, and then, without warning, it made you feel something real. And those are just 2 episodes. During the Golden Age, the show was producing classics at a rate that is honestly kind of absurd when you look at it. Season 4 alone gave you Mr. Plow, Last Exit to Springfield, Whacking Day, and Camp Krusty. Season 5 had Cape Fear, where Sideshow Bob stalks Bart in a witness protection program, which includes one of the most famous comedy sequences in the entire show. Bob, stepping on rakes over and over again for what feels like an eternity. Season 6 delivered And Maggie Makes 3, Homer the Great, Lemon of Troy, and Who Shot Mr. Burns Part 1, a season finale cliffhanger that had the entire country guessing all summer long about who pulled the trigger. Season 7 gave us King Size Homer, Scenes from the Class Struggle in Springfield, and Radioactive Man. Season 8 brought Homer's Enemy, an episode where a normal, hardworking man named Frank Grimes enters Homer's life and slowly loses his mind trying to understand how someone as lazy and reckless as Homer can have such a good life. That episode was the writers directly responding to audience criticism about Homer never facing real consequences, and they turned that criticism into one of the darkest and most talked about episodes in the history of the show. Every single one of those episodes is a fully realized story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Every one of them has jokes that land. Every one of them has characters who feel like real people making real choices, even though they are yellow cartoon characters living in a town that does not exist. That is the secret of the Golden Age. It was never just about being funny. It was about being funny and real at the same time. The humor came from the characters and their situations. It came from who Homer is as a person, from who Lisa is, from who Bart is. The comedy was built into the fabric of the show, not bolted on from the outside. Now, to be fair to Family Guy, that show had its own strong years. Most fans agree that seasons 3 through 6, with the peak being around season 4 after the show came back from being canceled, represent Family Guy at its best. That is when the cutaway gags were still fresh, the characters still had some warmth to them, and the show had a certain energy that made it stand out. Season 4 premiered in 2005 after Family Guy had been canceled twice and brought back thanks to massive DVD sales and strong ratings on Adult Swim reruns. Episodes like PTV, where Peter starts his own television station to fight censorship, and the Star Wars parody Blue Harvest from season 6 showed that Family Guy could be genuinely creative when it wanted to be. But here is the thing. Even at its best, Family Guy was operating in a different lane than Golden Age Simpsons. Family Guy's strengths were in rapid-fire jokes, pop culture references, and shock value. Those are real skills, and when they work well. But The Simpsons during the Golden Age was doing all of that and more. It was doing sharp social commentary, it was doing character-driven stories that made you cry 1 minute and laugh the next. It was building an entire world with hundreds of supporting characters who each felt like they had their own life going on outside of the main story. Family Guy at its peak was a really funny sketch show held together by a family of characters. The Simpsons at its peak was a living, breathing universe. And the critics noticed. The Simpsons was not just popular during the Golden Age. It was respected in a way that few animated shows have ever been. Time magazine named it the best television series of the entire 20th century. Not the best cartoon, the best series. The American Film Institute gave it a special award, calling it one of the most outstanding comedy shows in television history. Multiple prominent TV critics have ranked those Golden Age seasons among the greatest sustained runs of quality in the history of the medium. One writer described the show during that period as working at a level of comedy and character that no show ever has, before or since. Family Guy has won awards, too. Nobody is taking that away. But when critics talk about the greatest stretches of television comedy ever produced, The Simpsons' golden age comes up in every single conversation. Family Guy does not. That is not a knock on Family Guy as much as it is a statement about just how high The Simpsons set the bar during those years. And here is what makes the Golden Age argument so powerful when comparing these two shows. Both The Simpsons and Family Guy have declined over time. That happens to every long-running show. You run out of fresh ideas, the writers change, the world moves on. But the floor that The Simpsons fell from was so much higher than Family Guy's floor that even the weaker Simpsons seasons from the 2000s and 2010s still had moments of brilliance that showed flashes of what the show used to be. Critics have pointed out that even a diminished version of The Simpsons is still watchable because the standard it set was just that impossibly high. One pair of TV critics wrote that to understand how a show could fall so far and still be worth watching, you had to understand how great it was at its peak. And they were talking about The Simpsons. The Golden Age is not just a nostalgic memory for fans who grew up watching the show. It is a documented, critically recognized stretch of television that changed what people expected from comedy. It proved that a cartoon could be as smart, as layered, and as emotionally rich as the best live-action dramas and comedies on television. It raised the bar for every animated show that followed, including Family Guy. And 3 decades later, nobody has cleared that bar. Family Guy was funny. At its peak, it was very funny. But The Simpsons during the Golden Age was not just funny. It was art. And the difference between those two things matters more than most people realize. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But great writing only gets you so far if the characters carrying that writing are flat and boring. And this is where the gap between these two shows gets even wider. Because The Simpsons built some of the most layered, most human, most beloved characters in television history, while Family Guy went in a very different direction. Section 3. Character depth versus cardboard cutouts. One of the biggest differences between The Simpsons and Family Guy has nothing to do with which show has better jokes or which one has more shocking moments. It comes down to something much more basic than that. It comes down to the people. Or, in this case, the characters. Because when you strip away everything else, a television show lives or dies based on whether or not you actually care about the people in it. And on that front, The Simpsons is not just ahead of Family Guy, it is in a completely different league. Let us start with the Simpson family itself. There are 5 of them. Homer, the dad, Marge, the mom, Bart, the oldest kid, Lisa, the middle child, and Maggie, the baby. On paper, they sound simple. A dumb dad, a patient mom, a troublemaker son, a smart daughter, and a baby who does not talk. But the genius of The Simpsons, especially during its peak years, was that none of these characters ever stayed that simple. Every single one of them had layers. Every single one of them felt like a real person with real feelings, real flaws, and real reasons for being the way they are. Take Homer. On the surface, Homer Simpson is easy to describe. He is overweight, he loves beer and donuts, he works a job he hates at a nuclear power plant, and he is not very smart. That is the surface level version that everyone knows, even people who have never watched the show. But Homer is so much more than that. He is a man who gave up the job he loved, working at a bowling alley, because Marge got pregnant with Maggie, and he needed the higher paycheck from the power plant to support his growing family. In the episode And Maggie Makes 3, we see Homer go back to the job that makes him miserable, and his boss, Mr. Burns, puts a sign above his workstation that reads, "Don't forget, you're here forever." It is meant to crush his spirit. But by the end of the episode, we find out that Homer has covered up parts of those words with photos of Maggie, so now it reads, "Do it for her." That is not just a joke. That is one of the most powerful moments in the history of animated television. And it tells you everything about who Homer really is. He is a man who will sacrifice his own happiness for his family without a second thought, even when he complains about everything else in his life. And the show kept showing us these sides of Homer. In Lisa the Beauty Queen, he sold his ride on the Duff Beer Blimp, something he had won and was incredibly excited about, so he could use the money to enter Lisa in a beauty pageant because she was feeling bad about herself. In Rosebud, he gave up his chance at wealth from Mr. Burns so that Maggie could keep a teddy bear she loved. In The Last Temptation of Homer, He was genuinely attracted to a coworker named Mindy Simmons, who shared all of his interests and seemed perfect for him. But when the moment came, he chose Marge. Not because someone told him to,
Not because he got caught.
but because he loved his wife. Homer is lazy, yes. Homer is dumb, yes. But Homer loves his family with everything he has, and the show never let you forget that. That tension between his flaws and his love is what made him one of the most popular characters in television history. He is not a hero. He is not a villain. He is just a guy doing his best with what he has. And that is something almost everyone watching at home can see a little bit of themselves in. Now look at Lisa. Lisa Simpson is 8 years old. She plays the baritone saxophone. She is a vegetarian. She is a Buddhist. She is a member of Mensa with an IQ of 159. She is an activist for the environment and for social justice, and she is often the smartest person in any room she walks into. But she is also lonely. She struggles to make friends because her interests set her apart from the other kids at school. She feels like nobody in her own family really understands her. She loves her dad, but is painfully aware that he cannot keep up with her intellectually. She looks up to role models outside her family, like the jazz musician Bleeding Gums Murphy, because she cannot always find what she needs at home. And yet, when it comes down to it, she is fiercely loyal to her family. In the episode Lisa's Wedding, a fortune teller shows her a future where she falls in love with a man who looks down on the Simpsons. Lisa leaves him, because as much as her family drives her crazy, she would never let someone disrespect them. Lisa is not just, quote, the smart kid. She is a fully realized young girl dealing with the weight of being different, the frustration of being surrounded by people who do not share her curiosity, and the very real childhood experience of wanting to belong, while also refusing to change who she is. That is deep, layered writing. That is the kind of character work that makes people connect to a cartoon the same way they would connect to a real person. Bart is the troublemaker. Everyone knows that. But the show gave him so much more than just pranks and attention. In Bart Gets an F, he genuinely tries to pass a test and studies harder than he ever has, only to fail anyway. When he breaks down crying in front of his teacher, it is one of the most honest moments the show ever produced. In that moment, Bart is not the class clown. He is a kid who just found out that sometimes trying your hardest still is not good enough. That is a real feeling that real people go through, and The Simpsons let Bart go through it on screen without turning it into a joke. Marge is the glue. She holds everything together. She puts her family's needs above her own, every single time, to the point where it sometimes hurts her. She gave up opportunities, swallowed her frustrations, and kept the house running while Homer stumbled through life. But the show also showed us the cost of all that sacrifice. There are episodes where Marge reaches her breaking point, where the stress of holding the family together becomes too much. She is not a perfect wife and mother standing in the background. She is a woman with her own dreams that she set aside, and the show acknowledged that. Even Maggie, the baby who almost never speaks, gets her moments. She has shot Mr. Burns. She has led a baby revolt at a daycare that was inspired by The Great Escape. She once said her first word, "Daddy," in the final seconds of an episode, and nobody in the family heard it except the audience. Maggie barely has any dialogue across the entire series, and yet she has more personality and more memorable moments than most of the Griffin family put together. Now let us look at Family Guy. The Griffin family has 5 members too: Peter, Lois, Meg, Chris, and Stewie, plus the family dog Brian. On the surface, the setup is similar. Fat dumb dad, patient wife, awkward daughter, dumb son, and a baby. But here is where the comparison falls apart, because while The Simpsons took that basic setup and added layers to every character, Family Guy mostly kept its characters flat, and then, over time, made them worse. Peter Griffin started out as a lovable idiot. In the early seasons, he was dumb, sure, but he meant well. He cared about his kids. In one early episode, he told Meg he would take a bullet for her. He loved Lois. He was basically Homer Simpson with a different accent and a different chin. But as the show went on, Peter did not get deeper. He got meaner. He went from being a well-meaning fool to someone who actively enjoys hurting the people around him. His stupidity stopped being accidental and started being cruel. He became someone who abuses his own daughter for laughs, who causes pain to his friends and neighbors and never learns anything from it. There is no do-it-for-her moment for Peter Griffin because the show stopped caring about giving him those moments. And then there is Meg. This is probably the clearest example of the difference between the two shows. In The Simpsons, Lisa is the daughter who feels like an outsider, but the show treats that with care. It explores what that loneliness feels like. It gives her moments of triumph and connection. It respects her. In Family Guy, Meg is the daughter who exists almost entirely to be abused. Her own father wishes she was dead. Her mother ignores her. Her siblings mock her. Strangers on the street are disgusted by her. She is not a character with a story. She is a punching bag. In the early seasons, Meg was actually somewhat normal, a regular teenage girl trying to fit in. But over time, the writers turned her into nothing more than the butt of every joke. She has no hobbies that the show takes seriously. She has no ambitions that the show respects. She has no growth. She just gets hurt over and over again, and the audience is supposed to laugh. Chris is Peter, but younger. That is about as deep as his character goes. He is overweight, he is not smart, and he rarely has episodes that explore who he is beyond those two traits. Compare that to Bart, who across hundreds of episodes has been shown to be a kid with genuine artistic talent, real emotional depth, a complicated relationship with his father, and a surprising amount of heart underneath his troublemaker surface. Stewie started as a baby with plans to take over the world and kill his mother. That was a funny and original idea, but the show did not know what to do with it over time. And Stewie slowly turned into something completely different, a more sensitive, often insecure character whose relationship with Brian became the emotional center of the show. That shift was interesting, but it also felt like the writers could not decide who Stewie actually was, and he changed depending on what the episode needed rather than following any consistent character logic. Brian had one of the worst character shifts in the entire show. He started out as the voice of reason, a thoughtful, well-read dog who gave the family grounded advice. Over time, he became a pretentious, self-absorbed hypocrite who chases women, lies about his beliefs, and treats the people around him with growing disrespect. Fans have pointed out that Brian went from being the most likable member of the family to one of the least likable. The difference between these two shows when it comes to characters is not small. It is enormous. The Simpsons built people you care about. Family Guy built props for jokes. And when a show only uses its characters as props, it runs into a serious problem over time, because those characters start to change in ways that do not make sense and do not feel earned. The Simpsons characters grew. The Family Guy characters rotted. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And that rot is exactly what we need to talk about next, because what happened to the Griffin family over the years is one of the most dramatic examples of character destruction in television history. Section 4. The Flanderization Catastrophe. How Family Guy destroyed its own characters. There is a word that gets thrown around a lot when people talk about long-running television shows, and that word is flanderization. It comes from Ned Flanders on The Simpsons. Ned started out as a normal, well-meaning neighbor who happened to be religious. Over time, his religious side got turned up so high that it became basically his only personality trait. That process, where one small part of a character slowly takes over until it is the only thing left, is flanderization. It happens to a lot of shows that stay on the air for a long time, but no show in animation history has suffered from it as badly as Family Guy. To understand just how bad it got, you need to remember what Family Guy's characters were actually like in the beginning. Because in the first 3 seasons, the Griffin family was not the collection of monsters they eventually became. They were actually kind of likable. Peter Griffin in the early seasons was a dumb guy who loved his family. That was pretty much it. He made bad decisions, sure. He was selfish sometimes. He was loud and obnoxious. But at his core, he cared about the people around him. In the Season 2 episode, The Story on Page 1, Peter tried to seduce the actor Luke Perry to protect Meg from a lawsuit, and he flat out said he would take a bullet for her. That is not a throwaway line. That is a father expressing love for his daughter in a real, meaningful way. In another early episode, Peter tells his family how much he cares about them at the end. In first season episodes, it was actually common for the show to end with Peter showing some kind of warmth toward the people in his life. He was Homer Simpson with a Rhode Island accent. Dumb, flawed, but good at heart. Lois in those early seasons was a patient, loving mother. She played piano. She tried to listen to her kids, even when she did not always get it right. She was the voice of reason in the house, the person who kept things from falling apart when Peter went off the rails. She genuinely cared about all of her children, including Meg. She was not perfect, but she was trying.
Brian was the family dog who could talk, and he was probably the most popular character on the show for a while. He was well-read, thoughtful, and served as the voice of reason that balanced out Peter's chaos. He gave good advice. He looked out for the family. His relationship with Stewie was one of the best things about the show because it paired two very different personalities together in a way that felt natural and funny. Meg was a normal teenage girl. She wanted to be popular, she had crushes on boys, she worried about fitting in at school. She was not a punchline. She was a person. Her problems were the kind of problems that real teenagers go through, and the show treated those problems with at least some respect. Her parents cared about her. Her dad bought her a pony once, even though he forgot to feed it and it died, which was played as a joke, but the point was that he tried. That was the Griffin family at the start. Flawed, messy, but recognizable as a family. You could see yourself in them, they were not perfect, and that was the point. But then the show got canceled. Twice. And when it came back for good in 2005, something started to change. Slowly at first, and then all at once. The turning point for Peter is often traced to a season 4 episode called Petarded. In that episode, Peter takes an IQ test and scores so low that he is officially declared mentally disabled. That episode marks the moment where Peter's stupidity stopped being a character trait and started being a condition. Before Petarded, Peter was dumb but functional. He held down a job, he could have conversations. He made bad choices, but he understood what choices he was making. After Petarded, the writers seemed to decide that Peter's intelligence had no floor. He could be as dumb as the joke needed him to be in any given scene, and there were no rules anymore. But the stupidity was not the real problem. The real problem was that Peter stopped being kind. By season 8, Peter Griffin was no longer a lovable idiot. He was something closer to a bully. His cruelty toward Meg went from the occasional thoughtless comment to full-blown abuse. He farts on her face as a recurring bit. He tells her to her face that he wishes she had never been born. In the episode Peter's Daughter, he shoots Meg at point-blank range just for saying hi to him. This is the same man who once said he would take a bullet for her. That is not character growth. That is character destruction. And it was not just Meg. Peter's disregard spread to everyone around him. He stopped learning lessons at the end of episodes. He stopped showing remorse when he hurt people. The early Peter would do something stupid, realize it was wrong, and try to make it right. The later Peter does something cruel, watches the consequences unfold, and either does not notice or does not care. He went from being a well-meaning fool who was too dumb to see the damage he caused, to a man who causes damage on purpose because it is funny to him. Fans started calling this version of the character Jerk-Ass Peter, and the name stuck because it was accurate. Lois went through her own transformation. The loving, patient mother from the early seasons slowly disappeared. In her place came a woman who is cold to her children, dismissive of Meg, and increasingly selfish. In one episode called Steroids, Lois gives up on cheering Meg up and just tosses her a dark novel and a bottle of sleeping pills. That is not a joke about a mother being imperfect. That is a joke about a mother hinting that her daughter should hurt herself. The Lois from season 1 would never have done that. But the writers had stopped caring about who Lois was supposed to be. They only cared about what was funny in the moment, and they decided that Lois being terrible was funny. Brian's decline is one of the saddest in the whole show. In the early seasons, Brian was smart, self-aware, and principled. He read books. He gave thoughtful advice. He was the character you trusted. But over time, Brian became a pretentious, self-absorbed hypocrite. He talks about being a great writer, but his one novel was awful, and he knows it. He talks about caring about important issues, but he only brings them up to impress women. He chases younger women constantly and treats them poorly. And in one of the most criticized episodes in the show's history, a season 12 episode called Herpy the Love Sore, Brian knowingly gives Stewie and Chris herpes through a Blood Brothers ritual, and then tries to hide it from them. This is the same character who was once Stewie's best friend and closest companion. the same character who was supposed to be the heart of the show. And the writers had him deliberately infect a baby and a teenager with a disease as a punchline. Only 7 episodes earlier, in Life of Brian, the show had killed Brian off and Stewie had been devastated, willing to do anything to get his friend back. 7 episodes later, Brian cannot even be bothered to tell Stewie the truth about his own health before mixing their blood together. That is not just bad writing. That is a show that does not remember or does not care about its own characters. And then there is Meg. Meg's transformation is different from the others because Meg did not become a worse person. The world around her just became crueler. In the early episodes, Meg was a regular teenage girl whose family loved her, even when they did not always understand her. Over time, the writers turned her into the family's punching bag. Every character in the show takes turns making her life miserable, and the audience is supposed to laugh at it. Her father tells her he hates her. Her mother ignores her pain. Her brother insults her. Strangers are disgusted by her. She went from being a normal character with normal problems to being a target for every mean joke the writers wanted to make. The worst part is that the show knows this. In the season 10 episode Seahorse Seashell Party, Meg finally snaps. The family is trapped in the house during a hurricane, and Meg unloads on all of them. She tells Peter he is a terrible father. She tells Lois she is a bad mother. She calls out Chris for being a bad brother. It is one of the most satisfying moments in the entire run of the show because for the first time, someone is saying out loud what the audience has been thinking for years. The Griffin family has been treating Meg like garbage, and she finally tells them so. But here is what happens next. When Meg speaks up, the rest of the family falls apart. They cannot handle being criticized. They start turning on each other, fighting and screaming, falling to pieces without someone to dump on. And so Meg takes it all back. She apologizes to them. She decides that the family cannot function without her acting as their, quote, lightning rod to absorb all of their anger and cruelty. She voluntarily goes back to being the punching bag because, according to the show, the family needs her to be one. That ending was one of the most criticized moments in the entire history of Family Guy. Fans and critics tore it apart. A reviewer from the AV Club wrote that nobody cares about any member of the Griffin family the way people care about every last Simpson. He said that instead of working to make Meg a better character, the show spent years going down the path of least resistance and joined the fan chorus of hatred. And he was right. The show had a chance to fix one of its biggest problems, and instead, it doubled down and told Meg and the audience that the abuse was just how things had to be. Now, compare all of this to The Simpsons. Has The Simpsons experienced flanderization? Yes, absolutely. Homer got dumber over the years, Lisa got preachier, Ned Flanders became a religious stereotype. These are real criticisms that even the biggest Simpsons fans will admit to. But there is a massive difference between what happened to The Simpsons and what happened to Family Guy. The Simpsons characters got exaggerated. Family Guy's characters got gutted. Homer got dumber, but he never stopped loving his family. Even in the worst seasons of The Simpsons, Homer will still do something kind for Marge, or sit with Lisa when she is sad, or show up for Bart when it matters. The core of who Homer is never disappeared. It got buried sometimes, sure, but it was always there. Peter Griffin's core disappeared entirely. There is nothing left of the man who said he would take a bullet for Meg. That person does not exist in the show anymore. He was replaced by someone the show's own fans call a psychopath. The Simpsons also never turned any of its characters into a permanent victim the way Family Guy turned Meg into one. Lisa gets frustrated. Bart gets in trouble. Marge gets overwhelmed. But the show never decided that one character's entire purpose was to suffer so the other characters could feel better about themselves. Family Guy did exactly that with Meg. And then, when it had a chance to undo it, it chose to keep it going. This is the fundamental difference. The Simpsons characters grew in ways that sometimes went too far, but the foundation held. Family Guy's characters were hollowed out from the inside until there was nothing left to care about. The show started with a family you could root for, and ended up with a family that is hard to even like. And when you do not like the characters, when you do not care about what happens to them, then the emotional moments do not land. The jokes do not hit the same way. The whole thing starts to feel empty. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Which brings us to exactly that. Because while Family Guy was busy tearing its characters apart, The Simpsons was doing something Family Guy has never been able to match. It was making people cry. Real tears from a cartoon. And that is something worth talking about. Section 5. Heart and Soul. The Simpsons can actually make you cry. Here is something that does not get talked about enough when people compare The Simpsons and Family Guy. A lot of the conversation focuses on which show is funnier, which one has better jokes, which one pushes the boundaries more. But comedy is only one half of the equation. The other half is emotion. And on that front, there is no comparison at all. Because The Simpsons, at its best, could make you cry. Real tears from a cartoon about a yellow family. And it could do it without ever feeling cheap or forced because the emotion came from characters you already loved, going through things that felt painfully real. Family Guy has tried to do this a handful of times over the years, and almost every single time it has fallen flat. Not because the writers do not want you to feel something, but because the show has spent so many years tearing its characters apart that when it suddenly asks you to care about them, there is nothing left to grab onto. You cannot spend 10 seasons turning Peter into a monster and then expect the audience to cry when he gives a speech about friendship. You cannot turn Brian into a selfish hypocrite and then expect people to mourn when he dies. The emotion does not land because the foundation is not there. The Simpsons built that foundation first, and that is what made all the difference. Let us start with one of the most famous emotional moments in the history of animated television. The episode is called "And Maggie Makes 3" from season 6. We have talked about this one before, but it is so important to this topic that it deserves a deeper look. The episode is a flashback. Homer tells the kids about what happened when Marge got pregnant with Maggie. At the time, Homer had finally achieved his dream. He had quit his miserable job at the nuclear power plant and started working in a bowling alley, the one job in his entire life that made him truly happy. For the first time, Homer was not dragging himself to work every morning. He was excited. He was fulfilled. He had enough money to pay the bills, and he loved every second of his day. Then, Marge gets pregnant. And just like that, the dream is over. Homer cannot support a family of 5 on a bowling alley salary. He has to go back to the power plant. He has to walk into Mr. Burns' office and beg for his old job back. And Burns makes him pay for it by putting up a plaque above his workstation that reads, "Don't forget, you're here forever." It is a punishment. Burns wants Homer to look at those words every single day and know that he is trapped. But in the final moments of the episode, we see Homer's workstation, and we see that he has covered parts of the plaque with photographs of Maggie. The words now read, "Do it for her." No big speech, no dramatic music building to some over-the-top moment. Just a simple, quiet shot of a father who gave up the thing that made him happiest, so his daughter could have a life. And it hits like a freight train every single time, because the show has spent years making you understand who Homer is. You know how much he hates that job. You know how much he loves his kids. You know both of those things are true at the same time, and that is what makes the moment land so hard. That kind of emotional storytelling requires trust. The writers have to trust that the audience cares about the characters enough for a quiet moment to work. And the audience has to trust that the writers are not going to undercut the emotion with a cheap joke 2 seconds later. The Simpsons earned that trust over and over again. Take the episode Mother Simpson from season 7. Homer's mother, Mona, voiced by Glenn Close, shows up after being gone for over 26 years. Homer thought she was dead his entire adult life because his father told him she had died when he was a kid. Turns out she had been on the run from the law the whole time, forced into hiding after she helped destroy a germ warfare laboratory owned by Mr. Burns back in 1969. The episode tells us why she left, and more importantly, it shows us the cost. Homer grew up without a mother. He carried that loss with him his entire life, without even knowing the truth. When Mona has to leave again at the end of the episode because the FBI has tracked her down, she tells Homer that no matter what happens, he has a mother, and she is truly proud of him. Homer says that at least this time he is awake for her goodbye, referring to the fact that she left the first time while he was sleeping as a child. She bumps her head getting into the van and lets out a "Don't!" proving one last time that she really is his mother. And then the van drives away. And Homer just stands there. He watches her leave. He does not go inside. He does not make a joke. He sits on the hood of his car and stares at the stars, and the credits roll over that image in total silence. No music over the credits, no promos.
The Simpsons staff had to fight with Fox to let that final shot play without interruption, and they won. Bill Oakley, one of the showrunners, admitted he always gets teary-eyed watching that ending. That scene works because it is about something real. It is about a grown man who never got over losing his mother and who just lost her again. It does not tell you how to feel. It just shows you Homer alone looking at the sky and lets you feel it for yourself. That is sophisticated emotional storytelling. That is something most live-action shows struggle to pull off, and The Simpsons did it with a cartoon character who eats donuts and says dough. Then there is Lisa's substitute from season 2. Lisa's regular teacher, Miss Hoover, goes on medical leave, and she is replaced by a substitute named Mr. Bergstrom, voiced by Dustin Hoffman under a fake name because he was worried a cartoon credit would hurt his career. Mr. Bergstrom is everything Lisa has been looking for. He is smart, kind, passionate about teaching, and he takes her seriously. For the first time in her life, Lisa has an adult male role model who sees her for who she really is, something her own father, as much as she loves him, has never been able to do. But Mr. Bergstrom is a substitute. He was never going to stay. When he tells Lisa he is leaving for a teaching job in the projects of another city, she chases him to the train station and tells him she'll be lost without him. And he writes her a note. He tells her that whenever she feels alone, whenever she feels like she cannot rely on anyone, the contents of that note are all she needs to know. She opens it. It reads 4 words. You are Lisa Simpson. That is it. 4 words. And they are devastating. Because the whole episode has been about Lisa searching for someone who understands her, and what Mr. Bergstrom is telling her is that she already has everything she needs inside herself. It is empowering and heartbreaking at the same time. James L. Brooks, one of the most important figures behind The Simpsons, personally wrote that line. Yardley Smith, the voice of Lisa, said she grew as an actress after working with Hoffman on that episode. The cast flew to New York to record with him, and Brooks directed the session himself. But the episode is not done. Later that night, Lisa is devastated at the dinner table, and Homer does not understand why. When he asks what her problem is, she snaps and calls him a baboon. Marge sends Homer upstairs to make things right. And here is where the magic happens. Homer sits with Lisa in her room and tells her, honestly, that he does not know how she feels. He says that he has never lost anyone important because everyone he cares about still lives under his roof. It is a simple, kind, slightly clumsy thing to say, and it is enough. He makes her laugh by imitating a monkey, and she apologizes for calling him a baboon. Homer then goes to Bart's room and cheers him up too, after Bart lost a class election. And then he checks on Maggie, who has lost her pacifier in the dark, and he finds it for her. In one quiet sequence, Homer proves that even though he will never be Mr. Bergstrom, he is still a good father in his own way. Writer Al Jean called it his favorite sentimental episode. Now compare all of that to Family Guy's biggest attempt at emotional storytelling. In season 12, the show killed off Brian Griffin. In the episode Life of Brian, Brian gets hit by a car while setting up a street hockey net. He dies at the vet's office. The family holds a funeral. Peter gives a speech about how Brian was his best friend. The family adopts a new dog named Vinny. It was presented as a permanent, serious moment. The show promoted it heavily. It generated massive buzz. Fans were outraged. A petition on change.org to bring Brian back collected over 120,000 signatures. Seth MacFarlane said the team was surprised at the intensity of the reaction. And then, 2 episodes later, in Christmas Guy, Stewie used time travel to go back and push Brian out of the way of the car. Brian was alive again. Everything was reset. The whole thing was undone. After the episode aired, MacFarlane tweeted that the team would have to be out of their minds to kill Brian permanently, suggesting the whole thing was planned as a temporary stunt from the start. This is the fundamental difference between the two shows when it comes to emotion. The Simpsons earns its emotional moments. It builds them carefully, roots them in character, and trusts the audience to feel something without being told to. Family Guy tries to manufacture emotional moments by doing something dramatic and then hoping the drama alone is enough to make people care. But drama without foundation is just noise. When Homer sits on the hood of his car staring at the stars, you feel it in your chest because you know this man, you know what he has lost, and you know he is never going to talk about it again tomorrow.
When Brian dies, you feel cheated because the show has already spent years making Brian less likable, and then it asks you to grieve for 2 weeks before undoing the whole thing. There are other emotional Simpsons moments worth mentioning. Bart gets an F, where Bart studies harder than he ever has for a test and still fails, breaking down in genuine tears in front of his teacher. One fish, two fish, blowfish, bluefish, where Homer thinks he has 24 hours to live after eating bad sushi and spends his final day trying to experience everything he never got around to. Bart sells his soul, where Bart sells his soul to Milhouse for $5 and then slowly realizes something important is missing from his life, even though he cannot explain what it is. These are episodes of a cartoon, a silly, joke-heavy cartoon about a yellow family in a made-up town. And yet, they hit emotional notes that most prestige dramas would kill for. They can do that because the characters feel real. Because the writers cared about making them real. Because the show understood that the best comedy does not just make you laugh. It makes you feel things you were not expecting to feel, in moments you were not ready for. Family Guy never figured that part out. It never built the emotional infrastructure needed for those moments to work. When it tries to be serious, it feels like a stranger asking you for a hug. When The Simpsons is serious, it feels like hearing from an old friend who knows exactly what you are going through. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And if the gap between these two shows is already this wide when it comes to characters and emotion, wait until we talk about how they actually build their jokes. Because The Simpsons' approach to comedy is fundamentally different from Family Guy's in one very specific way, and it has to do with the single most controversial element of Family Guy's entire structure: the cutaway gag. Section 6. Cutaway gags. Comedy's biggest crutch. If there is one thing that separates Family Guy from almost every other comedy show on television, it is the cutaway gag. You know the format. A character says something like, "This is worse than the time I," and then the screen cuts to a short, unrelated scene that has nothing to do with the story. Peter is suddenly in ancient Rome. Or a celebrity is doing something random. Or a talking animal is in an office meeting. The clip plays for a few seconds, sometimes longer, and then we cut back to the main plot as if nothing happened. That is a cutaway gag. And Family Guy does not just use them once in a while, it uses them constantly. Writers for the show have said they are typically told to write around 10 to 12 cutaway moments per episode. Some get used, some do not, but the point is that these gags are not an occasional bonus. They are the backbone of the entire show, and for a while they worked. In the early seasons, the cutaway gags were genuinely funny. They were surprising. Nobody had really seen a show do that before in quite the same way. You would be watching a normal family sitcom, and then suddenly you were in a completely different universe for 10 seconds, watching something absurd happen, and then you were back. It felt fresh. It felt different. It was one of the things that made Family Guy stand out when it premiered in 1999. But here's the problem. A cutaway gag, by definition, has nothing to do with the story. It does not grow out of the characters. It does not come from the situation. It does not build on anything that happened before or set up anything that happens after. It is a self-contained joke that could be dropped into any episode at any time without changing anything about the plot. And when a show relies on that format as heavily as Family Guy does, something very specific starts to happen. The stories stop mattering. The characters stop mattering. The whole show becomes a delivery system for random jokes, and the plot is just the string that connects one cutaway to the next. This is not just my opinion. It is one of the most common criticisms Family Guy has faced since it came back from cancellation in 2005. Critics, fans, and even other shows have pointed it out, but no one did it more famously than South Park. In April 2006, South Park aired a 2-part episode called Cartoon Wars. In those episodes, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, the creators of South Park, went after Family Guy directly. The plot involves Cartman trying to get Family Guy canceled. When he infiltrates the show's studio, he discovers something shocking. The writers of Family Guy are not people at all. They are manatees. Actual sea mammals living in a giant tank. The manatees pick up idea balls from a large pile, each one with a random noun, verb, or pop culture reference written on it. 5 balls go into a machine, and out comes a cutaway gag. That is the joke. South Park was saying that Family Guy's comedy is so random, so disconnected from plot and character, that it might as well be written by animals pulling words out of a tank. Cartman even says it out loud at one point. He tells Kyle that Kyle's angry reaction to his plan is emotional character development based on what's happening in the storyline, and then adds, "Not at all like Family Guy." That line tells you everything about what Parker and Stone think of Family Guy's approach to comedy. They believe it is the opposite of character-driven storytelling. It is random assembly. And the reaction from the animation community was telling. Trey Parker later said that after the first part of Cartoon Wars aired, there was what he called an animation solidarity moment, where everyone did come together over their hatred of Family Guy. The producers of The Simpsons sent flowers to the South Park offices. The writers of King of the Hill called and told them they were doing God's work. Parker and Stone were so pleased by the response from the Simpsons team that they added a character who looked like Bart Simpson into the second part of the episode. It was one of those rare moments where competing shows openly agreed with each other about something. And what they agreed on was that Family Guy's writing was something they did not respect. Now, to be fair, the Family Guy writers have handled this criticism with humor. They embraced the manatee joke, and in DVD commentaries after the South Park episodes aired, they started referring to their own cutaway jokes as manatee jokes. Seth MacFarlane has acknowledged the criticism and mostly shrugged it off. The showrunners have said that the cutaway format allows them to stay current, comparing it to how sketch shows like Saturday Night Live can reference pop culture every week. One showrunner said that Family Guy was doing that kind of short-form topical comedy before platforms like YouTube even existed. And that is a fair point. The cutaways do allow Family Guy to be nimble in a way that more plot-heavy shows cannot be. If something funny happens in the news, they can throw a quick reference to it into next week's episode without reworking the whole story. That is an advantage. But it is also a trap. Because when you build your entire comedy structure around disconnected bits that can be swapped in and out at will, you are building a show with no foundation. You are building a show that is funny in the moment, but forgettable in the long run. Think about the jokes you remember from The Simpsons. Almost all of them come from character and situation. Homer seeing a sign that says, "all you can eat," and taking it as a personal challenge. Mr. Burns asking Smithers to release the hounds. Sideshow Bob stepping on rakes over and over again in Cape Fear. Ralph Wiggum saying, "I'm in danger," with a smile on his face. These jokes work because they are rooted in who these characters are. Homer's joke is funny because you know Homer is the kind of person who would take an all-you-can-eat buffet as a challenge. Mr. Burns releasing the hounds is funny because you know Burns is the kind of person who keeps attack dogs on standby. Sideshow Bob stepping on rakes is funny because you know how dignified Bob tries to be, and each rake that hits him in the face chips away at that dignity a little more. Now, think about the cutaway gags you remember from Family Guy. You might remember a few. The giant chicken fights, Conway Twitty, maybe a celebrity doing something funny. But try to remember which episode they were in. Try to remember what was happening in the story when the cutaway started. Most people cannot. Because the gags are designed to be separate from the story. They are designed to stand alone. And jokes that stand alone do not stick the same way as jokes that grow out of something you care about. The Simpsons understood this from the very beginning. The show's comedy operates on multiple levels at the same time. There are jokes in the dialogue, jokes in the background of the animation, jokes on signs and newspapers that flash by so quickly you might not catch them on the first viewing, and jokes built into the music and the camera angles. The animators hid gags in every frame. A book title on a shelf might be a punchline, a headline in a newspaper Homer is reading might be funnier than the scene itself. The church sign outside Reverend Lovejoy's church changes every episode, and it is almost always a joke. The show is so dense with humor that you can watch the same episode 5 times and notice something new every single time. And all of this humor comes from the world the show is built. The jokes on Springfield's signs are funny because you know Springfield. The jokes about Moe's Tavern are funny because you know Moe. The jokes about the nuclear power plant are funny because you know Mr. Burns and you know Homer, and you know the relationship between them. Everything connects. Every laugh is earned, not just by the punchline itself, but by everything the show has taught you about these people and this place over the years. Family Guy's cutaways skip all of that work. They skip the character building. They skip the world building. They skip the setup. They just go straight to the punchline and hope it is funny enough to carry itself. Sometimes it is, There are genuinely hilarious cutaway gags in Family Guy. Nobody's denying that. But when you take a step back and look at the two shows side by side, the difference in craft is enormous. The Simpsons builds a house and then tells jokes inside it. Family Guy throws punchlines through the window from the sidewalk. And this difference matters more than you might think, because comedy that is rooted in character and place does something that random comedy cannot. It ages better. The Simpsons' best jokes from the early 90s are still quoted constantly today. People reference them in everyday conversation, they use them as reactions online, they share screenshots of them in group chats. Those jokes have lasted 30 years because they are about something. They are about human behavior, human weakness, and human silliness, filtered through characters you know and love. Family Guy's pop culture cutaways, on the other hand, have a shelf life. A joke about a celebrity from 2006 is only funny if you remember that celebrity and what they were doing in 2006. A parody of a commercial that aired 10 years ago only lands if you saw the commercial. These kinds of references are funny in the moment, but they fade. 20 years from now, a lot of Family Guy's cutaways will need footnotes to explain what they were even about. 20 years from now, Homer saying "dough" when he drops something will still be funny, because dropping things and being frustrated about it is something every person on the planet can relate to until the end of time. The cutaway gag is not a bad tool. It is fine in small doses. But when it becomes the main event, when it replaces story and character as the primary source of comedy, it turns a show into something closer to a sketch reel than a sitcom. And a sketch reel can be entertaining, it can make you laugh, but it will never make you feel the way a great story with great characters can. It will never make you care. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Family Guy chose the sketch reel. The Simpsons chose the story. And the results speak for themselves, not just in comedy, but in the very worlds these shows built around their characters. Because Springfield is not just a setting, it is a living, breathing place with a history and a personality of its own. And that is something Quahog has never come close to matching. Section 7. Springfield versus Quahog. World building that actually matters. A great television show needs more than just good characters and good jokes. It needs a place, a world that feels like it exists even when the camera is not pointing at it. A setting so rich and so lived in that you can close your eyes and walk through it in your mind, naming the stores, the streets, the people you would pass on the way. The Simpsons has that, Family Guy does not. And that difference matters more than most people realize. Springfield is not just a backdrop. It is one of the most fully realized fictional towns in the history of television. Over 35 years and more than 700 episodes, the show has built a place that feels real. Not real in the sense that it could actually exist, because Springfield has deserts and beaches and forests and mountains and a gorge and a harbor and a nuclear power plant, and apparently borders Ohio, Nevada, Maine, and Kentucky, all at the same time. That geography is impossible, and the show knows it. The joke is that nobody knows what state Springfield is in, and the writers have gone out of their way to keep it that way for decades. Matt Groening, the show's creator, chose the name Springfield specifically because it is one of the most common city names in the United States, so that everyone watching would think it was their Springfield. But what makes Springfield feel real is not the geography. It is the people. Springfield has hundreds of recurring named characters, each one with their own personality, their own quirks, their own running jokes, and in many cases, their own backstory. These are not extras. These are people you know. And the fact that you know them is what makes the whole town come alive. Think about the places in Springfield. Moe's Tavern is not just a bar. It is the bar where Homer goes to drink Duff beer with his friends Barney, Lenny, and Carl, while Moe Sislak, the cranky bartender with a heart that is mostly darkness but with occasional flickers of something softer, serves them drinks and answers. Prank calls from Bart. You know Moe. You know his face, his voice, his failed love life, his constant depression, his shotgun under the bar. Moe's Tavern is a real place in your mind because the character who runs it is a real person in your mind. The Quickie Mart is not just a convenience store. It is the store run by Apu Nahasapima Petalon, an immigrant from India with a PhD in computer science who ended up working behind a counter selling squishies and overpriced groceries, and who eventually had octuplets with his wife Manjula.
Apu has his own story. He has his own hopes and frustrations. He is not a prop. The store is not a prop. They are part of the fabric of Springfield. Springfield Elementary is where Bart and Lisa go to school, and it is staffed by some of the most memorable supporting characters in television. Principal Skinner, a man who served in Vietnam and came home to live with his mother, who may or may not be his real mother, depending on which episode you believe. Mrs. Krabappel, Bart's perpetually exhausted teacher with a messy love life and a dry sense of humor. Groundskeeper Willie, the angry Scottish janitor who somehow became one of the most quotable characters on the show. Ralph Wiggum, the police chief's son, who is so innocent and so confused by the world around him that nearly everything he says has become a famous line. Superintendent Chalmers, who exists primarily to yell, "Skinner!" and be frustrated by whatever disaster is unfolding at the school. These characters are not just funny. They make the school feel like a real school, with real staff and real problems, even though the problems usually involve Bart riding his skateboard through the hallways, or the cafeteria serving something that may or may not be food. The Springfield nuclear power plant is where Homer works, and it is owned by Charles Montgomery Burns, a man so old and so evil that he once blocked out the sun just to increase the town's dependence on his electricity. Burns has his own assistant, Waylon Smithers, who is devoted to Burns in ways that go far beyond professional loyalty. The power plant itself has been the setting for nuclear meltdowns, safety violations, union disputes, and one very famous episode where Homer accidentally prevents a disaster and the phrase, "to pull a Homer," enters the town's vocabulary, meaning to succeed despite being completely unqualified. Then there is the town government, run by Mayor Quimby, a corrupt, womanizing politician who sounds like a Kennedy and who has been re-elected despite scandals that would end most real political careers. There is the police department, run by Chief Wiggum, a man so incompetent that he once let a criminal go because he could not figure out how his handcuffs worked. There is Reverend Lovejoy, who runs the church and has long since stopped caring about his congregation's spiritual well-being. There is Dr. Hibbert, who laughs at inappropriate moments. There is Lionel Hutz, the worst lawyer in America. There is Troy McClure, the washed-up actor whose introduction always begins with, "You may remember me from such films as..." There is Comic Book Guy, whose real name is Jeff Albertson, and who judges everything and everyone as the worst whatever, ever. Every single one of these characters has appeared in dozens, sometimes hundreds of episodes. They interact with each other in ways that make sense, they have relationships that change over time, they form a community, and because they form a community, Springfield feels like a real town. When something happens in Springfield, like a monorail being built, or the lake being polluted, or a comet heading toward the town, it matters because you know the people who live there. You care about whether they are okay. You know which ones would panic and which ones would try to fix it and which ones would try to make money off of it. Matt Groening has said he was inspired by the Canadian sketch comedy show Second City Television and its fictional setting of Mellonville, which also featured a large cast of recurring characters. That inspiration shows. Springfield is Mellonville on a massive scale, a town where every corner has a story and every face has a name. Now look at Quahog. Quahog is the fictional city in Rhode Island where Family Guy takes place. Seth MacFarlane modeled it after Cranston, Rhode Island, drawing from his time as a student at the Rhode Island School of Design in nearby Providence. The show does include some real Rhode Island landmarks and references, like the Providence skyline that can be seen in the background, and fictional locations inspired by real places, like Pawtucket Brewery, named after the real city of Pawtucket. Quahog has its locations. The Drunken Clam is the bar where Peter, Joe, Quagmire, and Cleveland hang out. The Griffins live at 31 Spooner Street. There is a high school named after the late Mayor Adam West. And there is Channel 5 News, where Tom Tucker and the late Diane Simmons anchored the local broadcast alongside field reporter Trisha Takanawa and the fast-talking weatherman Ollie Williams. These are not bad elements. Some of them are even memorable. But here is the difference. In Family Guy, most of these locations and characters exist to serve a specific function, and nothing more. The Drunken Clam is where Peter goes to drink. That is what it does. It does not have the layers that Moe's Tavern has. There is no
Moe equivalent behind the bar, whose personal life and emotional struggles you follow across decades. Horace, the original bartender, died in the episode Save the Clam, and while the show acknowledged it, the bar itself never carried the same weight as Moe's because the character behind the counter was never developed the way Moe was. Quahog's supporting cast is smaller and thinner. Joe Swanson is a paraplegic police officer who lives next door. Quagmire is a pilot and a womanizer. Cleveland was a deli owner who left for his own show, The Cleveland Show, and then came back. Mort Goldman is a pharmacist. Tom Tucker reads the news. These characters show up, they deliver their jokes, and they go away. Some of them are funny. Quagmire's giggity catchphrase is iconic. Adam West's bizarre behavior as mayor produced some great moments, but none of them feel like they exist outside of the scene they are currently in. They do not have the depth or the interconnectedness that Springfield's residents have. In Springfield, you can trace the social web. Homer works for Burns, who is Smithers' boss, who interacts with Moe, who serves drinks to Barney, who once dated a woman who was friends with Marge's sisters, who work at the DMV, which is in the same building where Homer once had to take a driving test. Everyone connects to everyone else in ways that feel natural and organic, because the writers spent years building those connections. In Quahog, the social web is much simpler. Peter knows Joe, Quagmire, and Cleveland. They go to the bar. They go home. The world outside of that small circle is mostly empty. This matters because world building is not just decoration. It is the foundation that everything else sits on. When Springfield faces a crisis, you feel it because you know the town. When Mr. Burns blocks out the sun, it affects everyone, from the school children to the bartenders to the retirement home residents, and you care about all of them. When Quahog faces a crisis, it usually only affects the Griffin family, and the town around them barely seems to notice. The episode 22 Short Films About Springfield from Season 7 is a perfect example of what The Simpsons can do with its world that Family Guy simply cannot. The episode tells a bunch of short stories about different Springfield residents, jumping from character to character, showing what Apu does on his break, what happens when Smithers gets stung by a bee, what goes on in Principal Skinner's kitchen when he invites Superintendent Chalmers over for lunch. That episode works because every single one of those characters is strong enough to carry their own 5-minute segment. You could make a whole episode about almost anyone in Springfield, and it would feel earned because the show has done the work to make them all interesting. Family Guy could never do that episode, not because the writers are not talented, but because the world is not there. You could not do a 5-minute segment about what the mailman in Quahog does on his day off, because the mailman does not exist as a character. You could not follow the pharmacist home and tell a story about his evening, because the show has not given him enough personality to sustain it. The only characters with enough depth to carry their own stories are the Griffins, Brian, and Stu. Everyone else is furniture. Springfield is a living town. Quahog is a stage set. Springfield has history, neighborhoods, rivalries, inside jokes, and a social fabric that holds everything together. Quahog has Spooner Street and the Drunken Clam, and not much else that sticks in your memory when the episode is over. And when a show builds a world as rich as Springfield, the comedy gets richer too. Jokes land harder when they come from a place you know and love. Stories mean more when they happen to people you have watched live their lives for years. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But world building and character and comedy structure are only part of the picture. Because behind all of those things, behind the jokes and the settings and the people, there is something deeper that separates these two shows. It is the kind of humor they choose. The Simpsons chose smart humor, satire that made you think while you laughed. Family Guy chose something very different. And that choice tells you a lot about what each show thinks of its audience. Section 8. Smart satire versus shock value. There is a big difference between making someone laugh because you said something clever and making someone laugh because you said something they cannot believe you just said. Both can be funny. Both can work. But only one of them lasts. And the gap between how The Simpsons and Family Guy approach their humor is one of the clearest reasons why one show is remembered as a masterpiece and the other is remembered as a guilty pleasure. The Simpsons, at its best, is a show about ideas. It uses comedy to say something real about the world. It takes a topic, whether it is politics, religion, corporate greed, education, media, the American family, or 100 other things, and it holds that topic up to the light and shows you how funny and how sad and how true it all is at the same time. The humor is sharp, but it is never mean just for the sake of being mean. There is always a point. Take one of the most famous episodes in the show's entire history. Last Exit to Springfield, from Season 4, which first aired on March 11th, 1993. Entertainment Weekly named it the greatest Simpsons episode ever made. The story is simple. Mr. Burns decides to take away the dental plan from his workers at the nuclear power plant. Lisa needs braces. Homer, realizing that losing the dental plan means he will have to pay for Lisa's braces himself, accidentally becomes the union leader and goes on strike against Burns. On the surface, it is a silly story about a dumb guy accidentally doing the right thing. But underneath that, the episode is a smart, funny look at labor versus management, at how workers fight for their rights, at how corporations try to crush them, and at how sometimes the little guy wins not because he is brilliant, but because the powerful guy overestimates him. Mr. Burns tries everything. He tries to bribe Homer, he tries to intimidate him, he even shuts off all the power in Springfield to break the workers' spirit. Nothing works, because Homer is too dumb to realize he is supposed to be scared. The episode is packed with jokes that work on multiple levels. Homer's brain bouncing between dental plan and Lisa needs braces over and over again until he finally connects the two thoughts is one of the most famous comedy bits in television history. Burns reminiscing about his grandfather dealing with workers by sealing them inside abandoned ovens is both horrifying and funny at the same time, because it captures how the super rich have always viewed labor as something to be crushed. And the final line, when Homer celebrates getting everything he wanted, and Burns says to Smithers, "I'm beginning to think that Homer Simpson is not the brilliant tactician I thought he was," is a perfect ending because it ties the whole theme together. The joke is that the working man won, and he has no idea how he did it. That is what smart comedy looks like. The laughs come from somewhere real. The story has something to say. And you walk away not just entertained, but with something to think about. The writers of the episode, Jay Kogan and Wallace Wolodarski, later said that as people who were in multiple Hollywood unions themselves, they enjoyed putting a pro-labor message out into the world while keeping everything funny. Co-showrunner Al Jean said the team was careful to be even-handed, to poke fun at both sides, so the episode never felt like a lecture. It just felt like a great Simpsons episode. The show did this kind of thing over and over again during its golden age. Mr. Lisa Goes to Washington from Season 3 took on political corruption. Lisa writes a patriotic essay about how much she loves America, wins a trip to Washington, and then sees a congressman accepting a bribe. Her faith in democracy is shattered, and she rewrites her essay to call out the corruption she witnessed. It is funny, it is sad, and it is real. The episode even parodies the kind of empty patriotism that gets rewarded in essay contests, with other kids giving the kind of meaningless speeches that sound good but say nothing. 2 cars in every garage and 3 eyes on every fish, from Season 2, had Mr. Burns running for governor after the health inspectors find a 3-eyed fish near his power plant. Rather than pay the millions of dollars needed to fix his plant's safety violations, Burns decides to run for office and change the laws himself. He hires a team that includes a spin doctor, a joke writer, and a character assassin to help him win. The episode shows how a rich man can buy an election, hire people to fix his image, and manipulate the public. And it does it all while being one of the funniest half hours the show ever produced. Lisa the Vegetarian from Season 7 had Lisa deciding to stop eating meat after visiting a farm and feeling bad about the animals. The episode shows the family in the town pushing back on her decision, and Lisa getting more and more aggressive about it, until Paul McCartney, who guest starred as himself, tells her that she should not force her beliefs on other people. The episode is funny, but it also has a real message about how to stand up for what you believe in without becoming the kind of person who pushes everyone else away. Paul and Linda McCartney agreed to be in the episode on the condition that Lisa would remain a vegetarian for the rest of the series, and the show kept that promise. This is what The Simpsons does. It picks a topic, finds the humor in it, finds the heart in it, and tells a story that sticks with you. The comedy is the vehicle, but there is always a destination. Now look at Family Guy. Family Guy's approach to humor is very different. It is loud, it is fast, it is designed to get a reaction, and that reaction does not always need to be a laugh. Sometimes it is a gasp, sometimes it is a cringe, sometimes it is both at the same time. And the show has leaned into that harder and harder as the years have gone on. Seth MacFarlane, the show's creator, has described Family Guy as an equal opportunity offender. That phrase has become a kind of shield for the show. The idea is that if you make fun of everyone, then no one can complain. Nothing is off limits. Everything is fair game. And there is a version of that philosophy that can produce great comedy. But the way Family Guy has used it over the years often comes down to something much simpler than clever commentary. It comes down to shock. In the Season 4 episode, The Cleveland Loretta Quagmire, Peter is shown as part of a barbershop quartet that delivers bad medical news to patients through song and dance. The song is called You Have AIDS. A man is told he has a deadly disease through a cheerful musical number. The writers said in the DVD commentary that the joke was meant to be tasteless. That was the whole point. The humor was not about saying something smart about how we deliver bad news, or about the healthcare system, or about anything really. The humor was just the shock of hearing something so awful delivered so cheerfully. Several AIDS organizations protested the song and its content. In Turban Cowboy from Season 11, Peter befriends a Muslim man named Mahmoud, who turns out to be planning a terrorist attack. The episode includes a cutaway gag showing Peter driving through a crowd at the Boston Marathon. This episode aired just 1 month before the actual Boston Marathon bombing in April 2013, and it became the center of a firestorm. The episode was pulled from streaming platforms. A fan-made video spliced together unrelated scenes from the episode and went viral, making things worse. The episode had so many jokes about Muslims and their culture that it was widely criticized as reckless and tasteless. Not because the topic should be off limits, but because the jokes were not smart enough to justify going there. In Quagmire's Dad from Season 8, Quagmire's father reveals that he is transgender. Brian unknowingly sleeps with her. When he finds out, he vomits violently and repeatedly. The other characters treat Quagmire's father with cruel jokes and disgust. The Griffins throw out food that she brought to dinner. Seth MacFarlane has said that he believes the episode treated the topic with care. Most critics disagreed, calling it mean-spirited. The portrayal of the transgender character herself was seen as somewhat respectful, but the reactions of every other character around her were played entirely for cruelty and shock. In When You Wish Upon a Weinstein from Season 3, Peter goes looking for a Jewish person to help him manage his money. Fox pulled the episode and refused to air it due to fears of being accused of anti-Semitism. The episode did not air until 3 years later, when it was released on DVD. Fox had enough concern about the content that they kept it off television entirely during its original run. And then there is Herbert, the elderly neighbor who is openly attracted to Chris, a teenage boy. Herbert appears in dozens of episodes. His entire character is built around a single joke, that he is a predator. The show plays this for laughs, over and over, across many seasons. In one episode, Chris even gets jealous when Herbert loses interest in him and becomes attracted to Peter instead, and the two of them fight for Herbert's attention. This is presented as comedy. There is no deeper point. There is no commentary on anything. It is just the shock of watching a cartoon make light of something deeply disturbing. Now, none of this means every Family Guy joke is bad, or that shock humor is always wrong. South Park also uses shock humor, and South Park is brilliant. The difference is that South Park almost always has a point. When Trey Parker and Matt Stone cross a line, they cross it for a reason. They are saying something about society, about politics, about the absurdity of the reaction itself. The shock is the tool, not the destination. Family Guy, more often than not, makes the shock the destination. The joke is that they went there. The joke is that they said it. And when the joke is just that you said something terrible, the humor has a very short shelf life. You laugh once, maybe, because you cannot believe they actually did that. But there is nothing to come back to. There is no second layer to discover on a rewatch. There is no line you quote to your friends a decade later because of how smart it was. The Simpsons quote that people share most often from Last Exit to Springfield is Burns' line about Homer not being the brilliant tactician he thought he was. That line is funny because it captures something true about the entire dynamic of the episode, about how the powerful often lose not because the other side outsmarts them, but because they outsmart themselves. It has layers. It rewards thinking. The Family Guy jokes that people remember are usually remembered because they cannot believe the show went that far. That is a very different kind of memory. Seth MacFarlane himself has started to wrestle with this. In a 2025 interview with CBS Sunday Morning, he admitted that his younger attitude of, "If it's funny, let's do it," was more complicated than he once believed. He said that comedy and jokes do have an impact, and that he looks back at some of the show's earlier material differently now. He said this conversation tortures him at night. When he started the show, he was 25 years old. He is now in his 50s, and the distance has given him a different view of his own work. That honesty is admirable, and it points to something important about the difference between these two shows. The Simpsons never had to look back and wonder if it went too far, because its comedy was built on a foundation of intelligence and empathy. It made fun of politicians, of corporations, of religion, of the media, of the American family, but it did so with a wink and a nudge, not with a sledgehammer. It respected its audience enough to trust that they would get the joke without needing to be hit over the head with it. Family Guy respected the shock. The Simpsons respected the audience. And in comedy, that is a choice that shapes everything. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But comedy does not just come from the approach. It comes from the people writing it. And when you look at who was actually in the room putting these jokes on paper, the difference between The Simpsons and Family Guy becomes even clearer. Because the writer's room that built Springfield during its golden age was one of the most talented collections of comedy minds ever assembled in one place. Section 9. The Writer's Room. Harvard Grads versus Manatee Balls. A television show is only as good as the people writing it. You can have the best voice actors in the world, the most beautiful animation, and the smartest ideas, but if the words on the page are not there, none of it matters. And when you look at who was actually sitting in the room writing The Simpsons during its golden age, and who was writing Family Guy, the difference is staggering. Not because one group of people is better than the other as human beings, but because the talent, the training, and the sheer concentration of comedic genius in The Simpsons writer's room during the early to mid-90s may be the most impressive gathering of comedy minds in the history of American television. The Simpsons writing staff was assembled in 1989 by Sam Simon, one of the show's 3 co-developers, alongside Matt Groening and James L. Brooks. Simon had come from live-action sitcoms like Cheers, and he brought that same level of craft and attention to the new animated series. He put together a core team of about 10 writers, and the names on that original list read like a hall of fame of comedy writing. John Swartzwelder, John Vitti, George Meyer, Jeff Martin, Al Jean, and Mike Reiss were all part of that early group. And what happened over the next several years, as the show grew and new writers came in, was something truly special. The show has joked about this itself, but the connection between The Simpsons and Harvard University is real. More than 30 Harvard alumni have written for The Simpsons over the years. The Harvard Lampoon, the university's famous humor magazine and the longest-running humor publication in America, served as a direct pipeline to The Simpsons writers' room. Al Jean and Mike Reiss, the show's very first staff writers, both attended Harvard and wrote for the Lampoon. They met as freshmen. After graduating, they wrote together for The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson and It's Garry Shandling's Show before being hired for The Simpsons. When many of their peers turned down the chance to write for a cartoon, convinced an animated show could never survive in primetime, Jean and Reiss signed on. By season 3, they were running the show. Former writers Bill Oakley and John Swartzwelder have both called season 3 the show's best. Then there was Conan O'Brien. Before he became one of the most famous talk show hosts in America, O'Brien was a writer. He graduated magna cum laude from Harvard in 1985 with a degree in history and literature. While at Harvard, he served as president of the Lampoon twice, only the second person ever to hold the position 2 times, and the first to do it in 85 years. After college, he wrote for Saturday Night Live, where he won an Emmy for outstanding writing. In 1991, he joined The Simpsons as a writer and producer. He stayed through seasons 3, 4, and part of season 5, right in the heart of the Golden Age. He wrote Marge vs. the Monorail, widely considered one of the greatest episodes in the show's history. He also wrote New Kid on the Block and Homer Goes to College, and he created the recurring character of the Sea Captain. He described the writer's room as a cramped, sweaty space where the team sat from 9 in the morning until 9 at night trying to be funny. The writers used O'Brien as their, quote, court jester, pointing at him when they got bored and watching him dance around the room to break the tension. Fellow writer John Swartzwelder eventually told O'Brien he was too talented to stay and needed to headline his own show. O'Brien left to replace David Letterman on Late Night, and the rest is history. Greg Daniels was another Harvard Lampoon writer who ended up at The Simpsons. He and O'Brien were in the same graduating class, the class of 1985. After Harvard, they drove to Los Angeles together, shared a car, shared an apartment, and shared an office. Daniels said they even shared a towel. They wrote together on Not Necessarily the News on HBO, then Saturday Night Live. Daniels joined The Simpsons in its 5th season after O'Brien left. He wrote some of the show's most beloved episodes, including Homer and Apu, Lisa's Wedding, Bart Sells His Soul, and Homer Badman. He also supervised 22 short films about Springfield, the episode that proved every character in Springfield could carry their own story. After 3 seasons on The Simpsons, Daniels left to co-create King of the Hill with Mike Judge, which ran for 13 seasons. He then adapted the British version of The Office for American television, creating one of the most successful comedies of the 2000s. He also co-created Parks and Recreation. 4 of the television shows Daniels worked on, Saturday Night Live, The Simpsons, King of the Hill, and The Office, were all named to Time magazine's list of the 100 greatest television shows of all time. John Vitti was another Harvard graduate who became one of the earliest Simpsons writers, hired in 1989 for the show's first season. He was president of the Harvard Lampoon alongside Mike Reiss. Vitti went on to write 25 episodes of the show, making him the 5th most prolific Simpsons writer in history. He later wrote for The Office and King of the Hill, and wrote the screenplay for the Simpsons movie, as well as films like Ice Age and Alvin and the Chipmunks. And then there was John Swartzwelder. He did not go to Harvard. He did not go to any famous comedy school. He started his career writing advertisements. In the mid-80s, he got a job at Saturday Night Live, where he shared an office with Robert Smigel and met George Meyer. When Meyer left SNL and created a tiny humor magazine called Army Man, Swartzwelder was one of the writers. In 1988, Sam Simon, who was a reader of Army Man, recruited both Swartzwelder and Meyer to write for The Simpsons. Swartzwelder became the most prolific Simpsons writer of all time, credited with 59 full episodes by a huge margin over anyone else. He wrote some of the most iconic episodes in the show's history, including Homer's Enemy, You Only Move Twice, Rosebud, Homer at the Bat, and Itchy and Scratchy and Marge. His scripts were known for needing less rewriting than anyone else's, with about 50% of his original material surviving the rewrite room, which was an unusually high number. He was so respected that by the 6th season, he was given special permission to write from home and send his scripts in, while the rest of the staff revised them. This was partly because Swartzwelder was a heavy smoker who clashed with a new no-smoking policy in the writer's room. According to Matt Groening, Swartzwelder used to write his episodes sitting in a booth at his favorite coffee shop, drinking huge amounts of coffee and smoking endless cigarettes. When California passed an anti-smoking law, Swartzwelder bought the actual booth from the restaurant and installed it in his house so he could keep writing the same way. Fellow Simpsons writer Matt Selman called Swartzwelder one of the greatest comedy minds of all time, and said he is the comedy writer whose words make the best comedy writers in the world laugh out loud. George Meyer said, "Even among comedy weirdos, he stands out. He's irreplaceable." Writer Dan Graney called him the best writer in the world today in any medium. Swartzwelder gave his first interview ever in 2021 to The New Yorker, more than 15 years after leaving the show. That is how private and focused he was. He just wrote. George Meyer himself was another giant in the room. He came from Army Man, the humor magazine he created, and he was a writer and producer on The Simpsons from season 2 all the way through season 17. Meyer's influence on the show was enormous. He brought an offbeat, observational style of humor that helped define what made The Simpsons feel different from everything else on television. His wife's brother, John Vitti, was also on the writing staff, and the two of them helped shape the show's voice together. Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein were another great writing partnership. Oakley went to Harvard and served as vice president of the Lampoon. Weinstein went to Stanford. They had been friends and writing partners since 8th grade. They wrote some of the show's best episodes and eventually became showrunners for seasons 7 and 8, which many fans and critics consider the final stretch of the Golden Age. This is the room that built The Simpsons, Harvard graduates, Emmy winners, future creators of The Office and Parks and Recreation and King of the Hill and Futurama and Late Night with Conan O'Brien. people who went on to write major Hollywood films, people who won Peabody Awards. The concentration of talent was absurd, and they pushed each other. The environment was competitive and intense, with 12-hour days and constant rewriting, every joke challenged, every line tested. The result was a show where even the throwaway background gags were sharper than the best jokes on most other programs. Now look at Family Guy. Seth MacFarlane created Family Guy in 1995 while studying animation at the Rhode Island School of Design. He graduated with a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree and was hired by Hanna-Barbera, where he worked as a writer and animator on shows like Johnny Bravo, Cow and Chicken, and Dexter's Laboratory. He was recruited based on his thesis film, The Life of Larry, which featured a middle-aged man and his talking dog, the characters that would eventually become Peter and Brian Griffin. MacFarlane was 25 years old when Family Guy premiered in 1999. MacFarlane's background was in animation, not comedy writing in the traditional sense. He was an incredibly talented individual, a genuine multi-talent who could write, animate, voice act, sing, direct, and produce. He voiced Peter, Stewie, Brian, and Quagmire himself, along with several other characters. He turned Family Guy into a billion-dollar franchise. By 2008, he signed a $100 million deal with Fox, making him the highest-paid television writer in the world at the time. But the writing staff around him was a different story. Family Guy's writer's room did not have the same depth of experience or the same track record that the Simpsons room had during the Golden Age. MacFarlane has said that the show's repeated cancellations, being pulled off the air twice in its early years, meant they were always having to restaff writers. That kind of turnover makes it hard to build the kind of deep, collaborative chemistry that the Simpsons writers had over many years of working together. And the approach to writing was fundamentally different. On The Simpsons, a single episode could go through dozens of rewrites. Every joke had to earn its place. The room was full of people who had spent years studying comedy, writing comedy, and competing to be funny against other extremely funny people. On Family Guy, the show leaned much more heavily on MacFarlane himself. His voice, his sensibility, his instinct for what was funny. By 2010, MacFarlane revealed during a Reddit session in 2017 that he had not personally written for the show since 2010, choosing instead to focus on production and voice acting. None of this means Family Guy's writers are bad. Some of them have done excellent work, but it is a matter of concentration. The Simpsons' Golden Age writers' room was a supernova of comedy talent. A once-in-a-generation collection of people who all happened to be in the same place at the same time, pushing each other to be better. Family Guy had a talented creator with a clear vision, surrounded by a staff that rotated frequently and operated in a very different way. That difference shows up on screen. It shows up in the density of the jokes, in the layering of the humor, in the way The Simpsons could be funny on 5 different levels at once, while Family Guy was funny on one. And it shows up in the legacy of the people who walked through those doors. The Simpsons writers' room did not just produce a great show. It produced the next generation of great shows. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And the proof of all that talent, all that effort, and all that brilliance can be measured in something very simple and very concrete. Awards. Trophies. Recognition from the people whose entire job it is to decide what the best television has to offer. And when you open the awards cabinet and compare what these two shows have won, the gap is not even close. Section 10. The awards cabinet. And it's not even close. Numbers do not lie. You can argue about taste all day long. You can say that what is funny to one person is not funny to another. And that would be true. You can say that awards do not define quality. And there is some truth in that too. But when the people whose entire job it is to watch television, study television, and decide what the best of television looks like, all arrive at the same answer over and over again for more than 3 decades, at some point, you have to listen. And when you open the awards cabinet and compare what The Simpsons has won to what Family Guy has won, the gap is so wide it barely counts as a comparison at all. Let us start with the big one, the Emmy Awards. The Emmys are the most important awards in American television, the same way the Oscars are the most important awards in film. Winning an Emmy means the best people in the industry looked at your work and said, this is the standard. The Simpsons has won 37 Primetime Emmy Awards, 37. It holds the Guinness World Record for the most primetime Emmys won by an animated television series. The show has been nominated over 100 times across multiple categories, including Outstanding Animated Program, Outstanding Voiceover Performance, and Outstanding Music and Lyrics. Family Guy, by comparison, has won 9 Emmy Awards from 32 nominations. 9 is not a bad number. Many shows never win a single Emmy, but 9 versus 37 tells a story. The Simpsons has won more than 4 times as many Emmys as Family Guy. 12 of The Simpsons Emmy wins have come in the Outstanding Animated Program category, which is the big prize for any cartoon on television. Family Guy has never won that award. Not once. In fact, Family Guy has not even been nominated in the Outstanding Animated Program category since 2006. The show that has been on the air since 1999, that has run for more than 20 seasons, has never once taken home the trophy that matters most for animated television. The Simpsons has won it 12 times. Family Guy did manage one historic Emmy milestone. In 2009, it became the first animated series to be nominated for Outstanding Comedy Series since The Flintstones in 1961. That is genuinely impressive and worth noting. But Family Guy lost that award to 30 Rock, and the show has never been nominated in that category again. Meanwhile, The Simpsons tried to get nominated in the Outstanding Comedy Series category back in 1993 and 1994. The producers submitted episodes including Mr. Plow and A Streetcar Named Marge, but the Emmy voters at the time were not ready to put a cartoon up against live-action shows, and the nominations never came. Several critics called it one of the biggest Emmy snubs of that era. The best year for The Simpsons at the Emmys was 1992, when the show won 6 awards, all for Outstanding Voiceover Performance. The cast members who bring Springfield to life, people like Dan Castellaneta, Hank Azaria, Nancy Cartwright, and Julie Kavner, have been recognized repeatedly for their work. Hank Azaria alone has won multiple Emmys for voicing characters like Moe Szyslak, Apu, and Chief Wiggum. The most recent win in this category came in 2024, when Azaria won again for his performance as Moe. Seth MacFarlane has won 4 Emmy Awards for Outstanding Voiceover Performance for his work on Family Guy. That is a strong personal achievement. He voices Peter, Stewie, Brian, and Quagmire, among others, and the range he shows across those characters is real talent. Alex Borstein, who voices Lois, also won an Emmy for her voice work on the show in 2018, but the overall count still leans heavily towards Springfield. Now let us look at the Annie Awards. The Annies are specifically for animation. They are given out by the International Animated Film Society, and they are considered the highest honor in the animation world. If the Emmys are the general election, the Annies are the vote from the people who know animation best. The Simpsons has won 34 Annie Awards, including 10 straight wins for outstanding achievement in an animated television program. 10 years in a row. No other show in the history of the award has ever done that. Family Guy has won 3 Annie Awards from 12 nominations. 3 versus 34. In the field that is supposed to be Family Guy's home turf, in the awards that are given exclusively to animated programs, The Simpsons has won more than 11 times as many trophies. Then there is the Peabody Award. The Peabody is one of the most respected honors in all of media. It is not just about entertainment. It recognizes work that has made a genuine contribution to public life and culture. In 1997, The Simpsons became the first animated series in history to win a Peabody Award. The award cited the show for providing exceptional animation and stinging social satire, both commodities which are in extremely short supply in television today. That quote captures exactly what makes The Simpsons special. It is not just a funny cartoon. It is a funny cartoon that says something about the world. In 2020, The Simpsons won a second Peabody, this time an institutional award, recognizing the show's lasting impact over 3 decades. Family Guy has never won a Peabody Award. Not one. The Simpsons has also won 12 Writers Guild of America awards. The Writers Guild Awards are voted on by professional television writers, the people who actually do the job. When the writers themselves say your show is among the best written programs on television, and they say it 12 times, that means something. Family Guy has been nominated for 3 Writers Guild Awards, but has not won. In 1999, Time magazine published its list of the greatest achievements in arts and entertainment of the 20th century. They named The Simpsons the best television series of the entire century. Not the best cartoon, not the best animated show, the best television series, period. They wrote that the show was dazzlingly intelligent and unapologetically vulgar, and that it had surpassed the humor, topicality, and yes, humanity of past TV greats. In that same issue, Time included Bart Simpson in the Time 100, their list of the 100 most influential people of the century. Bart was the only fictional character on the list. A cartoon 10-year-old was placed alongside presidents, scientists, artists, and world leaders as one of the most important figures of the last 100 years. On January 14, 2000, the Simpson family was awarded a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. They are one of the very few fictional characters to receive that honor. In 2008, Entertainment Weekly ranked The Simpsons #1 on their list of the top 100 shows of the past 25 years. In 2013, Entertainment Weekly called it the greatest American sitcom. In 2016, Vulture declared it the best television show ever made. In 2017, TV Guide named it the #1 animated series of all time. Family Guy has not received any of those distinctions. It has never been called the best show of any century. It has never received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. It has never topped any major all-time greatest list. It is a successful show, a popular show, and a show that has earned its place in pop culture. But when the conversation turns to the greatest, it is not in the room. Family Guy has done well in some award categories. It has won 5 Teen Choice Awards. It has been nominated for People's Choice Awards. Seth MacFarlane personally has done very well, winning multiple Emmys and receiving Grammy nominations for the show's soundtrack album. The show also won 2 Golden Reel Awards for sound editing. These are real achievements, and they deserve respect. But there is a difference between being liked and being considered the best. Family Guy is liked. The Simpsons, at its peak, was considered the best. Not just the best cartoon, not just the best comedy, the best. And Family Guy knows it. The show has addressed this gap openly, sometimes with humor and sometimes with frustration. In the season 16 premiere, titled Emmy-Winning Episode, Family Guy dedicated an entire episode to trying to win an Emmy. The characters tried different casting, different storylines, and different approaches, all in an attempt to get the recognition they felt they deserved. The episode was funny, but it was also revealing. It showed that the people making Family Guy are aware of the gap and feel it. When you are making a show about not winning the big awards, you are admitting that someone else has the trophies. There is also a moment from the crossover episode The Simpsons Guy that sums it up perfectly. During Peter and Homer's big fight scene, Homer breaks open a display case full of Emmy awards and uses them as weapons. It was a joke, but it was also the truth. The Simpsons has so many Emmys that its characters can literally throw them around. Now, are awards everything? No. There are great shows that never win awards and average shows that win plenty. Awards have their own politics and their own blind spots. But when one show wins 37 Emmys and the other wins 9, when one show wins 34 Annies and the other wins 3, when one show wins 2 Peabody Awards and the other wins 0, when one show is called the best television series of the 20th century and the other is not, the pattern is too clear to ignore. The awards are not telling us that Family Guy is bad. They are telling us that The Simpsons, at its best, was playing a different game entirely. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And those awards, those trophies, those magazine covers and Walk of Fame stars, they are really just the formal way of measuring something bigger, something that cannot be counted in numbers. They are measuring impact. They are measuring the mark a show leaves on the culture around it. And when you look at the cultural footprint of these two shows, at what they gave to the world, at what people still carry with them decades later, the difference becomes even more dramatic. Because The Simpsons did not just win awards. It changed the way people talk, the way people think, and the way people understand television itself. Section 11. Cultural Legacy. Dough versus Giggity. There is a test you can run on any television show to measure how deep its mark goes. It is not about ratings. It is not about how many seasons it lasted. It is about whether the show got inside the culture and stayed there. whether it changed the way people talk, the way they think, the way they see the world around them.
Whether decades after the best episodes aired, people still use its words and reference its moments without even realizing where those words came from. By that test, The Simpsons is not just a successful show.
It is one of the most culturally significant pieces of entertainment ever created. And Family Guy, for all its popularity, is not in the same conversation. Start with language. The Simpsons has changed the way people speak English. That is not an exaggeration. Mark Lieberman, who is the director of the Linguistic Data Consortium at the University of Pennsylvania, said in 2005 that The Simpsons has apparently taken over from Shakespeare and the Bible as our culture's greatest source of idioms, catchphrases, and sundry other textual allusions. Shakespeare and the Bible. A linguistics professor put a cartoon about a bald man who loves donuts in the same category as the two most quoted sources in the English language. And he was not joking. Homer Simpson's "dope" is the most obvious example. Dan Castellaneta, the voice of Homer, created the sound by shortening a longer noise that the actor James Finlayson used in old Laurel and Hardy movies. The staff told Castellaneta to make it quicker to save time, and it became the sharp, clipped "do" that people all over the world now recognize. In the actual scripts, it was never written as "do." It was always written as "ugh." But the sound became so famous, so universal, that in 2001, the Oxford English Dictionary added "dough" as an official English word. The definition reads, expressing frustration at the realization that things have turned out badly or not as planned, or that one has just said or done something foolish. In 2006, TV Land ranked it number 6 on their list of the 100 greatest television catchphrases of all time. But "dough" is just the beginning. The Simpsons gave the English language meh, a word expressing total indifference that is now used constantly online and in everyday speech. Writer John Swartzwelder is credited with first putting it into a Simpsons script. The BBC listed meh as one of the 20 words that defined the 2000s. The show also popularized embiggens and cromulent, two fake words invented for a joke about Springfield's town motto, "A noble spirit embiggens the smallest man." Bart introduced Quidjabo during a Scrabble game, defining it as a big, dumb, balding North American ape with no chin, a shot at Homer. Groundskeeper Willie called the French cheese-eating surrender monkeys in a 1995 episode, and that phrase was later used in real political writing, including by National Review columnist Jonah Goldberg in 2003, when France opposed the Iraq War. The Oxford Dictionary of Modern Quotations includes several lines from The Simpsons, including Homer's, "Kids, you tried your best and you failed miserably. The lesson is never try." These are not just funny lines from a TV show. They are phrases that left the show and entered the real world and stayed there. People use them without knowing where they came from. They have become part of the language itself. Now think about the catchphrases from Family Guy. Giggity is Quagmire's signature word. It is recognizable and fans of the show use it. Peter's laugh is distinctive. Stewie's "what the deuce" is memorable. "Shut up, Meg" became a running joke that fans repeated. These are all well known within the Family Guy audience, but none of them have crossed over into the broader culture the way Simpsons catchphrases have. None of them have been added to the Oxford English Dictionary. None of them show up in political columns or academic papers. None of them have been called contributions to the English language by linguistics professors. The difference is not just about catchphrases. It is about the depth of the cultural footprint. The Simpsons has been studied in college classrooms around the world. There are university courses built entirely around the show, examining its use of satire, its commentary on American politics, its treatment of religion, its exploration of family dynamics. Academic books have been written about it. The Simpsons in Philosophy is a book that uses episodes of the show to explore questions about ethics, happiness, and the meaning of life. Planet Simpson by Chris Turner examines how the show documented an entire era of American culture. These are not just fun fan books, they are serious works that treat The Simpsons as a text worth studying alongside literature and film. Family Guy does not have that kind of academic presence. It is studied in some media courses as an example of shock humor or postmodern comedy, but it has not inspired the same level of serious analysis. The difference is not about intelligence. It is about depth. The Simpsons has so many layers, so many references, so many connections to real-world ideas and traditions, that scholars can spend entire semesters unpacking a single season. Family Guy's humor, built more on cutaway gags and shock value, does not offer that same richness. Then there is the show's influence on other television. The Simpsons did not just create a successful cartoon. It created an entire category of television that did not exist before. Before The Simpsons, the last successful animated show in American primetime was The Flintstones, which ended in 1966. For more than 2 decades, networks believed that cartoons were for Saturday mornings and children's programming. The Simpsons proved them wrong. It showed that animation could be smart, funny, emotional, and profitable in a primetime slot, and it opened the door for everything that came after. Without The Simpsons, there is no Family Guy. Seth MacFarlane has said this himself. Without The Simpsons, there is no South Park, no King of the Hill, no Futurama, no Bob's Burgers, no Archer, no Rick and Morty, no BoJack Horseman. Every single one of those shows exists because The Simpsons proved that the audience was there and the format worked. The Simpsons did not just compete in the field of adult animation. It invented the field. Family Guy's influence has been real, but narrower. It popularized the cutaway gag format, where a character says something like, "This is worse than the time," and the show cuts to an unrelated scene. That structure has been imitated by other shows and has become a recognizable comedy technique. Family Guy also proved that a canceled show could come back stronger than ever, thanks to DVD sales and late-night reruns on Adult Swim. Its revival in 2005, after being canceled twice, is one of the great comeback stories in television history, and it showed networks that fan loyalty and home video sales mattered. That is a genuine contribution to how the television industry works. But the scope of influence is different. The Simpsons changed comedy itself. It influenced not just other animated shows, but live-action comedies too. Shows like The Office, Parks and Recreation, 30 Rock, Arrested Development, and The Daily Show all owe a debt to the kind of smart, layered, self-aware comedy that The Simpsons pioneered. The show taught an entire generation of comedy writers that you could be funny and meaningful at the same time, that you could pack a joke with references and still make it land for a general audience. The Simpsons also has something that no other show in television history can match: the feeling that it predicted the future. The show has become famous for episodes that seem to foretell real events years before they happened. The most famous example is from the season 11 episode Bart to the Future, which aired in 2000 and mentioned Donald Trump having been president of the United States. 16 years later, Trump was elected. The show has also been credited with predicting things like smartwatches, video calls, autocorrect failures, and the Disney-Fox merger. Now, the writers have always said these are coincidences, that when you make enough jokes about enough topics over 35 years, some of them are bound to line up with reality. But the Simpsons predicted it phenomenon has become its own piece of culture, endlessly shared and discussed online. It adds to the feeling that The Simpsons is not just watching the world, but somehow ahead of it. Family Guy does not have an equivalent cultural phenomenon. There is no Family Guy predicted it discussion happening in corners of the internet. The show's comedy is built more on referencing the past than imagining the future, and its cutaway structure means the jokes are disconnected from any larger story or theme that could accidentally line up with real events. The Simpsons has also produced one of the most successful pieces of internet culture in television history: Steamed Hams, a short scene from 22 short films about Springfield, in which Principal Skinner tries to pass off fast food hamburgers as his own cooking, while Superintendent Chalmers grows increasingly suspicious, became one of the biggest memes of the 2010s. People made thousands of remixes, parodies, and re-edits of the scene, in every style imaginable, from horror to musical theater to dramatic film. Bill Oakley, who co-wrote the episode in 1996, has said he is amazed that a scene he wrote over 20 years ago became one of the most shared pieces of content on the internet. Family Guy has produced viral moments too. Cutaway gags get shared on social media. Clips of Peter fighting the chicken in extended sequences have millions of views. But the scale and longevity of Simpsons memes, the way they keep getting reinvented and reshared decades after the episodes aired, is something Family Guy has not matched. And then there is the merchandise. At its peak in the early 90s, The Simpsons was selling over 1 million Bart Simpson t-shirts a day. The show generated billions of dollars in merchandise revenue. Bart's face was on everything from lunchboxes to skateboards to bedsheets. Bart Mania was a real cultural moment, a time when a cartoon character was the biggest thing in American pop culture.
The Simpsons has its own ride at Universal Studios theme parks.
The Simpsons movie, released in 2007, grossed over $530 million worldwide. A sequel has been officially announced. The show has been dubbed into over a dozen languages, from French to Japanese to Arabic. Family Guy has also been successful commercially. It developed into a billion-dollar franchise. It has merchandise, video games, and a strong presence in syndication. But the scale of The Simpsons' commercial and cultural footprint is larger, and it got there first, at a time when no animated show had ever achieved that level of mainstream dominance. At the end of the day, cultural legacy is about what a show leaves behind. When the last episode airs and the credits roll for the final time, what remains? For Family Guy, what remains is a show that made people laugh, that pushed boundaries, that proved a canceled show could fight its way back. Those are real achievements. But for The Simpsons, what remains is a show that changed the English language, changed the television industry, changed the way comedy is written, changed the way America sees itself, and created a world so rich and so beloved that it became part of the fabric of modern life. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And that brings us to the final question. Not which show is funnier, because humor is personal. Not which show you prefer, because preference is a choice. But which show set the standard? Which show built the foundation that everything else stands on? Which show, when you strip away the debate and the nostalgia and the personal taste, earned the right to be called the greatest animated series ever made? Section 12. Why The Simpsons will always be the standard. We have been on a long journey through these two shows. We started at the beginning, at a time when a cartoonist named Matt Groening sketched a family of yellow characters in the lobby of a producer's office and accidentally changed television forever. We walked through the golden age, through the writing, the characters, the comedy, the world building, the emotion, the awards, the cultural legacy, all of it. And now we are here, at the end, where the only thing left to do is say what this whole conversation has been building toward. The Simpsons is better than Family Guy, and it is not close. That is not an insult to Family Guy. Family Guy is a show that has made millions of people laugh. It is a show that was canceled twice and came back both times, proving that its audience believed in it even when the network did not. It is a show that turned Seth MacFarlane, a kid from Connecticut with a degree in animation from the Rhode Island School of Design, into one of the most successful people in entertainment. It produced a billion-dollar franchise. It gave us Stewie Griffin, one of the most original characters in animated television. It proved that a show could be raunchy, irreverent, and completely unafraid to offend, and still find a massive audience. Those are real accomplishments, and they deserve respect. But respect is not the same as the crown. The Simpsons earned the crown because it did everything. It was funny and smart. It was silly and deep. It could make you laugh until your sides hurt in one scene, and then make you cry in the next. It built a world so detailed and so lived in that a fictional town called Springfield, in a state that does not exist, feels more real to millions of people than the actual town they grew up in. It gave us characters who are not just punchlines, but people, complicated and flawed and lovable. People you cared about because the show took the time to make you care. It did all this while running for over 35 years, airing more than 800 episodes, and holding the title of the longest-running American scripted primetime television series in history. It has been renewed through its 40th season. Nothing else comes close to that kind of endurance. Family Guy chose speed. The Simpsons chose depth. Family Guy chose shock. The Simpsons chose craft. Family Guy chose the cutaway. The Simpsons chose the story. And over the course of decades, those choices added up. They added up in the quality of the writing. They added up in the richness of the characters. They added up in the weight of the emotional moments. They added up in the intelligence of the satire. They added up in the size of the cultural footprint. And they added up in the awards cabinet, where 37 Emmys sit on one side and 9 sit on the other. The golden age of The Simpsons. Those seasons from roughly 3 through 8. Represents a stretch of television that many critics and fans believe has never been matched by any show in any format. Not just animated shows, any show. The density of the humor, the sharpness of the writing, the warmth of the characters, the ambition of the stories, All of it came together in a way that set a standard the rest of television has been chasing ever since. The writer's room during that era was filled with people who went on to create The Office, Parks and Recreation, King of the Hill, Futurama, and Late Night with Conan O'Brien. It was a factory of genius, and the product it turned out was unlike anything that had come before. Family Guy's best seasons, roughly 3 through 6, were genuinely good. The show was funny, fast, and fresh. It felt like something new. But even at its peak, Family Guy was operating in a space that The Simpsons had already built. The audience was already there because The Simpsons had created it. The format was already proven because The Simpsons had proven it. The door was already open because The Simpsons had kicked it down. Seth MacFarlane has said this himself. He has said The Simpsons basically reinvented the wheel and created an audience for primetime animation that had not been there for many, many years. When the creator of Family Guy tells you that his show exists because of The Simpsons, argument is settled before it starts. But this is not just about history. It is about what each show brought to the table and what it left behind. The Simpsons left behind words in the dictionary. It left behind phrases in political columns. It left behind a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. It left behind academic courses at universities around the world. It left behind a generation of comedy writers who learned their craft by studying Springfield. It left behind a way of making comedy that blended high culture and low culture, that made a joke about a Shakespeare play and a joke about a man falling down a cliff in the same episode and made both of them work. It left behind a template that every animated comedy since has followed, whether they know it or not. Family Guy left behind a different kind of mark. It left behind a style of comedy that is fast, loud, and unafraid. It left behind the cutaway gag as a comedy tool that other shows have borrowed. It left behind a proof of concept that canceled shows can come back stronger. It left behind some genuinely iconic characters and moments. And it left behind a fan base that is fiercely loyal. But when you put the two legacies side by side, one of them is wider, deeper, and more lasting than the other. One of them reshaped the landscape. The other moved into the neighborhood after the landscape had already been reshaped. The Simpsons is not a perfect show. Nobody is arguing that. The later seasons have been criticized, sometimes fairly, for a decline in quality. Characters have been flanderized, episodes have felt repetitive, the magic of the golden age has faded. But even the fact that people measure later Simpsons against earlier Simpsons tells you something important. The standard The Simpsons set was so high that the show's own later work is judged harshly for not reaching it. That is not a failure. That is a testament to how impossibly good the peak was. Family Guy has also faced criticism for its later seasons. Characters became meaner, the shock value got louder, the cutaways became more of a crutch. Seth MacFarlane himself has said that the conversation about whether some of his show's jokes went too far tortures him at night. Both shows have had to wrestle with the challenge of staying relevant across decades of changing culture and changing expectations. That is a fight that every long-running show faces, and neither The Simpsons nor Family Guy has been immune to it. But the question was never which show stayed perfect the longest. The question is, which show set the standard? Which show built the foundation? Which show, when you look at the full picture, from the writing to the characters to the comedy to the emotion to the world building to the satire to the awards to the cultural legacy, earned the right to be called the greatest animated series of all time? The answer is The Simpsons. It was the answer before Family Guy existed. It has been the answer every year since. And barring something truly extraordinary, it will be the answer long after both shows have aired their final episodes. Time Magazine said it, the Peabody Committee said it, the Emmy voters said it 37 times. The Annie voters said it 34 times. The Oxford English Dictionary said it when it added a word from the show into the official record of the English language. The Hollywood Walk of Fame said it when it gave a star to a family that does not exist. The University of Pennsylvania said it when a linguistics professor compared the show's impact on language to Shakespeare and the Bible. Entertainment Weekly said it. Vulture said it. TV Guide said it. The creators of every animated comedy that came after said it, whether they said it out loud or just showed it in the work they made. The Simpsons is the standard. It was the standard when it started. It is the standard now. And when people 100 years from now look back at what television accomplished in this era, when they study the shows that defined a medium and shaped a culture, The Simpsons will be at the top of the list. Family Guy is a good show that made people laugh. The Simpsons is the show that changed everything. And honestly, if you have made it this far, if you have stayed with me through all 12 sections of this conversation, then you already knew that.
You knew it the moment you pressed play. You knew it before I said a word. Because deep down, everyone knows. The Simpsons is the greatest animated series ever made, and it always will be. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.